A monk walked into a funeral and laughed. Not just smiled. He laughed. The mourners were horrified. But what he said next silenced the entire room. A monk walked into the funeral and laughed. Not just smiled. He laughed. Loudly. Deeply. Unapologetically. The mourners froze. Eyes widened. A woman gasped. A man clenched his fists. Some thought he was drunk. Others thought he was possessed. But no one understood why he laughed. Not yet. It was a quiet funeral. A young woman, 32 years old, kind, beautiful, had died suddenly. The family was shattered. Her mother hadn't spoken in days. Her father stood stiff, pale, broken. The whole town came to mourn. Everyone wore black. Everyone carried sorrow. Everyone. Except the monk. He wore faded robes. No shoes. No expression. Just calm. As if death didn't touch him. As if grief was a language he'd stopped speaking long ago. He stood in the back for a while. Still as a statue. Then, as the casket was lowered, he laughed. A real laugh. Echoing. Alive. Some people turned. Others stared. One man whispered, "Is this a joke?" Another said, "Who even is he?" A man stood up, shaking. "You think this is funny?" he shouted. The monk looked at him and gently raised one hand. Not in defense. Not in defiance. But in peace. "Why are you crying?" the monk said. "She is finally free." The room went dead silent. No one moved. Not even the priest. The air felt heavier. And yet, lighter. The monk walked forward. Slowly. He touched the coffin with one hand. Closed his eyes. And whispered something no one could hear. Then he turned back to the mourners. "You think this is the end," he said. "But she's laughing louder than I am. Because she knows it's not." Murmurs spread. Some rolled their eyes. Some felt anger. But a few listened. That laugh wasn't madness. It was clarity. And this wasn't the first funeral he had laughed at. No. This monk had a story of his own. A story no one in that room could have imagined. Years ago, this same monk had died. Not metaphorically. Literally. He was found lifeless during meditation. No heartbeat. No breath. Pronounced dead. But 3 days later, he woke up. Not in fear. Not in confusion. But with a smile. When asked what he saw, he didn't describe heaven. He didn't mention tunnels of light. He only said one thing: there is no death. Only return. People thought he was crazy. A fraud. A mystic. But the way he lived afterward changed everything. He stopped fearing anything. Especially endings. Especially funerals. He started showing up at them. Sometimes invited. Often not. Always quiet. Always strange. And always laughing. Not to mock, but to remind that what we mourn may not be loss at all. Some families kicked him out. Others thanked him. One even asked him to speak. He never gave sermons. He told stories. Strange ones. Soft ones. Stories that made people cry. Then laugh. Then cry again. But at this funeral, this one was different. The woman in the casket was once his student. Years ago. She had come to him broken, divorced, depressed, suicidal. He didn't give her advice. He gave her silence. And in that silence, she healed. She learned to sit, to breathe, to watch the mind instead of obey it, to smile when life hurt, to laugh when it didn't make sense. She left after a year. She never looked back. But she sent him letters. Each one ending with, "I'm still laughing." And now, she was gone. Her laughter, buried in a wooden box. Or was it? The monk stood before the mourners and said, "She is not in this box. She is not in this grave. She is not in your tears." He looked at the mother, then the father, then the crowd. She is in the space between your next two breaths. Listen, and you'll hear her laughing. Someone in the back chuckled. Another smiled through tears. A young girl whispered, "He's right." That's when it began to shift. The sadness was still there, but it was softer now, lighter, like a fog lifting. The monk walked out in silence. No applause, no prayer, just the quiet understanding that sometimes the most healing thing in the world is to remember, death is not the enemy. Forgetting joy is. He didn't talk about it often, but those who asked, really asked, heard the story. The day he died was quiet. No drama, no lightning, just a long meditation. And then, stillness. Hours passed. His breath stopped. His pulse vanished. The monks around him panicked. They tried everything. But his body was lifeless, cold, empty. They called the doctor, declared him dead. The funeral preparations began. But on the third day, as they chanted near his body, his chest rose. Once, twice, then fully. He opened his eyes and smiled. "You're not supposed to be here," someone whispered. "Oh," he said, "I'm not. But I came back because you forgot something." They asked him what he meant. He said, "I forgot to laugh before I left." That line would haunt them for years. What did he mean? What had he seen? He never described tunnels. No voices. No judgment. No God with a list. Just space. Infinite, quiet space. He said he floated. Not as a body. Not even as a soul. Just awareness. Pure. Peaceful. Impossible awareness. There was no fear, he said. No time. No self. Just the realization that I had taken everything too seriously. He remembered clinging to things. Pain. Desire. Even spiritual pride. He remembered struggling to fix himself. To achieve enlightenment. To become pure. But in that space, none of it mattered. There was nothing to fix, he said. Only something to remember. That life is already whole. He realized he had wasted years trying to escape suffering instead of understanding it. He said the universe was laughing. Not at him, but with him. Because the punchline was simple, he had always been free. But he forgot. That's why he came back. To remind others what he had forgotten. Not through lectures. Not through scriptures. But through presence. Stillness. And sometimes, laughter. "If I cry at your funeral," he once said, "it means I forgot the truth again. But if I laugh, it means I remembered it with you." That's why he laughed at the funeral. Not because he didn't care. But because he cared enough to see beyond the form. Beyond the body. Beyond the temporary roles we play. The monk had faced death. Not as an enemy, but as a mirror. And what he saw made him smile. Not everyone accepted his laughter. Some people hated him for it. They said it was cold, disrespectful, insensitive. One woman even threw a shoe at him once. But the worst moment came months after the funeral. A mother came to his temple. Broken, angry, hollow. She had lost her only son. Car accident. He was 17. She hadn't slept since. Hadn't eaten properly. Hadn't smiled once. "I heard you laugh at funerals," she said. "Do you think death is funny?" The monk looked at her. Not with pity. Not with defense. But with stillness. "No," he said softly. "I think forgetting to live is funny." She stared at him, shaking. "You have no idea what it's like," she snapped. "He was my entire world." The monk nodded. "And now that world feels gone." "It is gone," she said. "Forever." He asked her one question, "Where is your son right now?" She looked at him. Furious. "Dead." The monk shook his head. "That's not what I meant." He pointed to her chest. "Right now." "Where is he?" She said nothing. "Close your eyes," he said. "Remember the last time he made you laugh." She didn't want to. But she did. Slowly. One corner of her mouth twitched. "What did he say?" the monk asked. She whispered it. "A stupid joke about socks." She chuckled. just once. Then covered her mouth. "I shouldn't laugh," she said. "He's gone." The monk leaned in. "That laugh is him." She began to cry. Not from pain. From something deeper. She realized. He hadn't disappeared. He had just changed form. From body to memory. From presence to imprint. From breath to silence. "If you cry, cry fully," he said. "But don't forget to laugh when his love surprises you." She came back every week after that. Not to be taught. Just to sit. To breathe. To feel what remained instead of clinging to what was lost. Over time, the grief softened. It never vanished. But it became lighter. More sacred. She eventually lit a candle in her house. Every time she missed him, she lit it and told him a joke. And sometimes, she swore she heard him laugh back. The monk never told her what to believe. He never promised she would heal. But he reminded her of one thing, that our love does not end where the body ends. And laughter, sometimes, is proof that love is still alive. Years passed. The monk grew older, slower, quieter. But his laughter never changed. It echoed through temples, funerals, even the streets. People didn't always understand him, but they remembered him. Especially when grief knocked. Especially when joy seemed impossible. Then came the second death. He knew it was coming. His body was fading. His lungs weaker. One morning, he asked his students to gather. "Today," he said, "I will leave." They thought it was a metaphor. It wasn't. He walked to the garden. Sat beneath his favorite tree. The same tree where he had once died years ago. "Do not chant for me," he said. "Do not cry for me." "Then what should we do?" a student asked. He smiled. "Tell a joke. A bad one." One monk hesitated. Then said, "Why did the monk refuse Novocaine at the dentist?" The others looked confused. The punchline came, because he wanted to transcend dental medication. Silence. Then, laughter. Even the old monk laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was human. Pure. Present. Real. His eyes closed. His breath slowed. One student reached to check his pulse. Gone. Just like before. But this time, he didn't come back. They didn't weep right away. They sat. In silence. Then one by one, they began to smile. He had left them something. Not a relic. Not a scripture. But a memory. A truth. That death was not a wall. It was a doorway. And on the other side, was a smile. At his funeral, the entire village came. They expected chants, incense, tears. But instead, they found laughter. Soft. Gentle. Honest. Someone had placed a small note in his hand. It read, "Don't worry. I remembered to laugh this time." And so they did. The monk who once laughed at death had taught them how to laugh with life. Not to avoid pain, but to honor it. Not to escape grief, but to soften it. And long after his body turned to ash, his laughter still echoed. In stories. In memories. In moments when the world hurt. And someone dared to smile anyway.